Hi there, welcome to another video where I attempt to explain something, and in this one I'm going to hopefully explain some of the notable families of Lancashire. And what you can see is my family tree that we're going to come back to a lot later on, and in the meantime I'm going to put up an image of the notable families of Lancashire. Now what we're talking about here is the landed gentry. What do I mean by that? Well, if you landed gentry, it means you've landed, in other words, you were born into gentrification, gentleman, i.e. you've got some money, you've got some land, you're a landowner. That means you're probably a baron or something like that. And a lot of these landowners continued through the generations under the same name, and that's where we get these names from. So you can see on this particular chart that I found the day after I completed my chart on the very same thing, you can see some notable names, and unfortunately they're not bigger and smaller, so you don't know what is what, but you can see that there are some big notable names scattered throughout the vicinity, and some of these that we'll return to later on. So you can see, starting at the bottom half of Lancashire, you can see the Heskeths. And the Heskeths, you might remember from the Formula 1 racing team, Lord Hesketh, and that's where all the money came from. The Heskeths basically owned all that big chunk, and Peter Molyneux, who was the software developer, created for Bullfrog and Lionhead software. He created Populous and Fable 2. Peter Molyneux came from the big long line of Molyneux families, which have this area here of Sefton. And their line can be traced all the way back to King Arthur. It's the cleanest King Arthur line that I've managed to find on my entire travels. So there are a few indirect ones, but that's the closest direct one through the Molyneux. And you can see the Stanleys have a big old chunk here, and there's also the Hollands as well, which it hasn't got on this map. So you can see Stanley all the way down there, and Ireland here and Ireland there and here, and Norris had somewhere here, and you can see that that's a knight, not of the round table unfortunately. The Trafford family, and you can see the Radcliffes of Ordsall. And the Radcliffes will be popping up left, right and centre. Daniel Radcliffe, of course, Harry Potter. So you can see Byron, who wrote Frankenstein. Byron came from this area. And so Ashton is basically Ashton, and they came from Ashton-under-Lyne and Greater Lever and that kind of thing. So Ashton, they had that big chunk. And there was also the Pilkingtons as well. And Barton pops up all over the place, and let's see, Lostock, Anderson, Errol, Halliwell, Radcliffe yet again, Townleys, that's a big family in Burnley, and the Shuttleworths of Gawthorpe Hall, the Nutters of roughly around Pendle, and the Nowells of Reed, that's another big family. The Talbots, you might remember from King Henry VI, was it? Well, yeah, there was only 6 of them. So Henry. Shireburn is another big family. They had Stonyhurst Hall. And what else do we get? Waddington, well, that has disappeared by now. Southworths, they had Samlesbury Hall. Southworth connected with the Pendle Witch Trials. And Nowell was the judge of the Pendle Witch Trials. So that's that connection. Haydock, Whiting. Some of these are small names that really don't mean anything except for in their time. So this Whittingham and Tildesley and Alston, Warren, they don't mean anything anymore, but they did back then. Fleetwood is up here, but there's also Fleetwood down there. And the Bannisters of Bretherton, they pop up everywhere you can see that there is land. A banister will pop up. So what else have we got on this version of the map? Fleetwood again in Bispam. Dalton, Timothy Dalton came from, Dalton region. Calvert Parker is more or less over here, but they've said that it's Lord of Hornby Castle in this particular version of history. The Middletons are supposed to come from Middleton, but they got kicked out by the Ashtons, so they ended up here. The Prestons got kicked out by the Daltons, they're up here. Preston, Preston, Preston. And so that is it for this kind of map. So it gives you some idea of the big names. Rigby, some idea, Standish, of the big names, but not all of them. And Gerard over there, and Lee. So if the place is named after a big family like Lee or Radcliffe, then, you know, Moseley, whatever, Trafford, then you know that it is a big family because they've got a whole place named after them. So that's that map. And then after, well, rather before that, I created my own map, which if I zoom out a bit more, just you can see the Duttons right at the bottom and the Cransfields up there and that kind of thing. But so if you want to take a screenshot, that's where you do it. But I'm going to zoom in and then you can actually see this a bit better. So it's cutting off the Duttons on the bottom. We're not worried about them. Le Bottelier turned into Butler. They were French. Molyneux, of course, again, French. And most of these are actually English. Up Holland is English. De Stanley, I'm not quite sure. Hesketh and Bannister, I think, are English. Townley, Southworth, Sherburn, Tempest. Well, Tempest might actually be someone from the Norman Conquest. De Thwing, I think that's another one. And the rest are all natives, so you can see. Well, it probably helps if I zoom in a bit more, and then you get some idea what we're talking about. So back in the old days, the Waddingtons had everything from Sladeburn all the way down here to Haslingden. And you can still see some Waddington remnants on the hills behind Haslingden all the way up to the 16th, 17th century. And they sold it to New Accrington, and they sold it to the Kenyans, and they sold a bit of it to the Rileys as well, who also had a farm, and I think Riley's farm is still there on that side of Accrington. They also sold it to the Rishtons, and so they had a big chunk of land all the way around here, Haslingden, that kind of thing. My name's Daniel Waddington, so that's how I know about that. And it was sold off and carved off, and Waddingtons married into the Tempests, so they lost a chunk of land from that, and then further on down the line they married the Townleys, and I think gained Rishton but lost another chunk of land because of that, and then it was sold off after that. So that's the Waddingtons, the Parker family of Radholm Lord. So Peter Parker, Spider-Man, Parker family originated around there. They were park keepers, so that's where that comes from. Talbot, famous for Waddington as well. They also had, well, Manors around Waddington, Wadhaw, I think. Pilkingtons, you can see all the way over here, but they came from all the way down there. You can see Pilkington was an enclosure all the way back then, and Radcliffe as well, so they were at war with each other. And so the Thwings had this entire region, I'm not quite sure. The Heskeths are down there. The Bannisters of Bretherton are also there. And you can see some other names. The Sherburns, Walmsleys, Hortons of Horton Tower, and Hesketh is over here as well. And you can also see Hesketh in Chipping as well. Hesketh in around here somewhere. They also had Marthorne Grange at one time, so that's why that's got Hesketh on it. And they're spread out. So Martin Brundle comes from Brundle, and Horton, Walmsley, Entwistle, Rigby, Eleanor Rigby comes from here. Timothy Dalton again. The De Stanleys, the Gerards, and another Gerard. And the Molyneux took over this land and this land. And the Blundells, not to be confused by the Brundles, the Blundells had this area, Crosby. Culcath and Southworth, this is where the Southworth originated in Risley, I think it says, and the Kenyans of Winwick. And the Kenyans pop up everywhere. Mitchell and Kenyon were from Blackburn, but Kenyans of Winwick and Southworth. So the Kenyans spread out all over the place. And the Hollands of Up Holland, that was again a big old area. Up Holland has nothing to do with Holland in Holland, even though the stories say that Sophie Rybeck married into this family. She didn't. That was a complete story. So Up Holland is where we get Holland from. In Accrington we have Holland's pies, and I used to go to school with a friend named Lee Holland who moved way down south. But Holland comes from this area. They are a royal. They married into the royals. So we might be hearing about them. The Radcliffes, Ainsworth, the Middlebrooks had this area, big old place in Middlebrook. The Waltons, and the Whartons, and the Ashtons again, they're there again. Charnock's had a big place. Charnock Richard is named after them. And what else can we see? Soodles, Blackburn, Radcliffe's again in Blackburn. Hesketh again, Broughton of Broughton. Catterall is an old enclosure that goes back. Radcliffe's again. Sherburn's again. And Singleton. The Singletons had Singleton, and they also had this area here, Hiswick, or whatever it says. And so Singleton pops up down here as well in Freckleton. So Singleton's a big name. Butler again, there it is, from Le Boteler. John Peel, police officers, they originated there. Dave Lister from Red Dwarf originated from there. William Holden originated from there. And that's Hammerton. Copeland had their own lodge. Bannisters and Hollands were all arguing over Nether Kellet. The Nevilles again was there. The Harrisons at Hornby, or Harrington. And we also have other names. The Kendalls of Kendal, of course. And the Haveringtons came from up there. We're not too worried about them. The Howarths of Haworth. Radcliffe again. Holt. Grimshaw. That came from Yorkshire and had a big place there. I think that's still called Grimshaw. So Bradshaw. Ainsworth. So if you've got Ainsworth there and Radcliffe, so if you've got one of these old names, then there is a chance on your family tree that you might be linked to one of these people, and therefore the old kings of England. How do we know that? Well, if we have a look at this chart, it explains that one time the kings of England were linked into the House of Lancaster, which is just up the road, and you can see King Edward III married into the Swinfords, and Blanche somebody or other also spawned all of the Henrys that we talked about. Henry VI was captured in Waddington, and he was turned in by the Talbots. And this line you can see also married into the Hollands of Up Holland in Lancashire, and they emerged as the Hollands of Exeter, and that's the royal line. And the other sister married into the kings of Portugal, and it looks like the son, he continued along the Beaufort line, so the Beauforts of Somerset, and through there you can see that Edmund Tudor married into the Beauforts. He didn't have any pedigree, married into there, and that's where we get the Tudors from. So they basically robbed us of everything because he had girls, and this line ran out because they killed Edward and locked the princes in the tower. Then we ended up going to Henry Tudor. But apart from all that, a lot of this was focused in Lancashire. So let's have a look at my tree then before I lose my voice. Let's take a sip of that water. So this is my tree. I'm not interested in the names at this point because all of these people have passed away apart from one. So we don't need to worry about that. This is my mother's side, this is my father's side. So if you are doing your family tree, what can you look out for? Well, let's have a look. Boozman. What do we know about this? Remember, we're looking from about 1600 up to, well, the Norman Conquest 1066, because they didn't really have records before then. So if we can break into 1600, then there's a good chance we can get back to the big kings and the barons. So let's have a look. Boozman. Let's see if we can get this back to anybody. And it doesn't, but it looks like there's an outside chance that it links to booze. De Trafford, which links into Lady Joanna Booth de Trafford of Manchester. Trafford is a big name. So we're back into the 15s. Hargreaves and Hargreaves of Wakefield. I'm not interested in Yorkshire names. Baldwin of Kildwick in Yorkshire. I'm not too worried about him. The Hartleys was a big name. Let's see if they go back to anybody. Devon and Wilkinson is a common name. Hargreaves, nothing on that line. So usually what you'll find is you can get back to that period, but unless they're connected to some kind of baron or lord or some kind of title holder, you're not going to find anything. So the Hartleys again go back, but they go back to Yorkshire, and the Wilkinsons go back to Yorkshire. So if you can find these names, it's not easy to trace them all the way back. And having done so, Kenyon. We know Kenyon is definitely one of those names that links back to the Kenyon branch, which is a separate branch that we probably won't get to. So sometimes you might find that it goes nowhere. So we can look at Doyle, and this is related to the Irish Doyles of Ireland. And he didn't tell anybody he was leaving Ireland, and he didn't get married before he left Ireland, so we've got no record of who this guy is, or who his father might be. But he definitely married Mary Hardy or Morton. We haven't got the faintest idea. And they came from them. They definitely had Daniel Doyle of Walton on the Hill from the Waltons. Remember the Waltons TV show? Near Preston, kind of Manchester side. So we don't know. And you can see that it only goes back one generation, because this guy knew his father and he knew his grandfather. We can say that this is a generation. And there's an outside chance that he knew his great-grandfather. So that's a generation. So it only goes back one generation, and it's a dead end. Let's see if we can find any more. So if you can get into people with coats of arms, then at least you can get somewhere. And that's a great start, because the Marslands, we've already found out where they came from, Oldham, and they go back to the Marsden family, Marsland, and they might have changed the name, just like the Tellier family changed their name to Taylor. And so we haven't got really much of a clue, but these are natives. They're not a big family, and they go all the way back to Henry de Merland of Merland, Castleton, Rochdale, and Alan de Merland of Merland, Castleton, in Rochdale. So that's where the Marslands come from. Not a really great heritage, but that's it. Hibbert doesn't go back anywhere, I don't think. Pilkinsons we've seen already. We can trace the Pilkinsons all the way back. So let's trace them back. We're into the 1500s, and if we did trace these names, then we'd find the Pilkinsons. You won't find many Radcliffes on this tree because they hated each other, but the Pilkinsons go all the way back to Pilkington in Bury, and the Ainsworth came from Derbyshire. So if you name Pilkington, there's a good chance that you go back to some kind of nobility. Greenwood, Banyard, Hoyle, Shaw, Wade. Well, Wade probably comes from Briarcliff. That probably comes from Yorkshire, so we're not too worried about that. And Lee comes from Lee in Lancashire, probably. Haworth, that's another name, but it comes from Haworth in Yorkshire. So again, I'm not too worried about that, but you can see the Haworths married into the Radcliffes, and the Radcliffes obviously go all the way back. I haven't filled in the names. Hendels, Whitaker, from Great Harwood, well, Simon Stone. Bradshaw, we know about the Bradshaws. So you can see, even if you find nobility, you might not necessarily fall over the King of England. So let's take another one. Gregson. Gregson, I don't think that's anybody, but I did think, oh yeah, Preston area. I think we saw the Gregsons on the main map around Preston area. Gregson, unknown. See Henry Gregson sitting on the hill, Derbyshire. So it could be him, or it could be the Gregsons, or Grogsons around Preston. These aren't big names, they haven't got call to arms or anything. Chew from Billington, no idea about that. Crew, no idea. Taylor, that's another Taylor, that probably comes from the Scottish Tallier line. So nothing to do with much. Hodgson, let's see, Ward. So yet again, Hurtley. I don't think that's anybody. I mean, we can trace them. Malham in Yorkshire. So we can trace them into Yorkshire, but we're not too worried about them. Clough of Clough, I think that's again a Yorkshire name. So we're looking for the Lancashire nobility here. Gracie, Brown, Henderson, we're not going to find anything there. Boardman doesn't go back to anybody. So let's get on to a few big names. Joseph Woods and Martha Ann Monk. So in the Monks, they go back, but I haven't traced them. And just because we haven't traced them on this family tree doesn't mean to say that they don't go back to the nobility and they don't go back to the kings of England. Because it's just that I haven't filled it in. We don't know. There's an outside chance that everybody's linked to everybody. So let's have a look at the Welshes. Where do they come from? Blackburn, they changed the name from the Welshes of Blackburn. In Lancashire, Gilbert Walsh came from Ogton near Ormskirk. So Walsh, Ogton name. It appears that they didn't really have any nobility, but they're linking with the Grimshaws that we've seen already on the big map. The Grimshaws at one side, Clayton Hall. So if you see anybody that owns halls, then they'll have a title, they'll have a crest, they'll have a history. And the Grimshaws, well, I think that's the nearest they got to a title, but you can see they married Alice Tempest was his mother. Obviously the Tempests go back. I haven't filled it in. And the Grimshaws, let's have a look. So I'm still in Grimshaw, Clayton Moors. And they go back to Eddisford, Grimshaw, Eddisford, which is near Waddington, which used to be in Yorkshire, but it's now in Lancashire. So that's as far as I've traced them back. It's not a big name, but they did at least get as far as Clayton Hall in Clayton Moors. But you can see, as soon as you hit something with anybody, it links into the Tempests, it links into the Rushtons of Rishton, it links into the Holts of Rishton, it links into the Shireborns, which is a massive name. Harrington de Stanley, that's two massive names rolled into one. Sherborne, Hamerton, we've seen already, Tempest and Hamerton. So the Rishtons go back through to Henry de Rishton. Before that, there was known as Gilbert de Blackburn, and he founded Rishton. He was the first Lord of Rishton. That was when the place was founded in 1216, and that links into Henry de Blackburn, and that links into the Blackburn line, and that originates in Gamaliel de Blackburn, who was a priest for William the Conqueror. So he was born in 1060, came from Normandy, and he was given land, he was given Blackburn by William the Conqueror. So his line goes to Normandy, and they didn't keep many records in Normandy, so we can't trace him back from there. But we do know he had a son called Gilbert de Blackburn from Blackburn, and he spawned Blackburn, and they spawned Rishton and the Lords of Rishton. So that's how Blackburn and Rishton, well, Blackburn is a Roman town, so they didn't found Blackburn. And Rusheaton was named after the rushes of the place. You see, he had Gilbert de Rishton had Duncan House Hall at one time, so they own the big halls around here. But it's named after the rushes, the bulrushes on top of Rishton, which, if you go through Rishton, there's still lakes and bulrushes up there. It's known as Rush Town. So you've seen the Shireborns already. Let's just take a quick look at the map, see where we are. Shireborn, Rishton, and Bannisters there. Hesketh, Clayton of Clayton Hall, Ingram, De Lacy, Southworth, Hesketh. So they're kind of all around this area. So let's have a look. The Shireborns, they took the name from the woman who had all the power. That's interesting. And they go all the way back through into Yorkshire with a surprise. And that reaches Yorkshire, so we don't know about them. And you can see Arbalaster, Arbalaster, and they go down to Norfolk as far as I know. Norfolk. So don't worry about that. Shireborn, Sherburn, the Mowbrays, the Declares. Let's see where they come from. Gloucestershire, Roger the Declare, Tunbridge Castle, the Declares, Hertfordshire, Clare in Suffolk. That's a town named after them, and they came from Tonbridge Saint Marie, and they came from the Count of Briony, Normandy. See this again, they're not really noble families of Lancashire, they come from Normandy. So we've started now to break in there. So let's have a look at the Stanleys, Harringtons. If you might remember where they came from, Haverington of Cumbria, they were named de Haverington. Haverington, Flemingby, Cumbria. That's a dead end at 1140. Cransfield, you might remember again on the big map. Cransfield and Haverington. So they're up there. Ian Fleming, let's have a look at Ian Fleming. Much land in Furness, Aldingham, Cumbria. And the Fleming name comes from Flemingby, named after the Flemings. Cransfield, look at that. Thomas Bannister. Thurston de Bannister. Mollington. Bannister Manor. So, obviously go all the way back. So where do they come from? Let's just have a quick look. Robert de Bannister, Rouen, Seine, Maritime, Court, Normandy, whatever that says. Norman, Le Bannister. It's all in the name. If it ends in an RE, then it's got to be French. Singleton, we've seen the Singletons already. I haven't filled it in. Thurston de Holland, of course, comes from up Holland, Lancashire. We've seen that already. And that goes up to Holland. It looks like it's dead end at Ralph Longworth de Holland of Longworth Hall, Longworth. Anyway, the Hollands had a title, they had a family crest. They're in Holland, Holland, Hall of Holland, and all that. So that's them. The Kellets, similarly, I haven't filled it in. But the Kellets of Garstang. Le Inglais, that sounds like it's Norman. It's Norman. They came from Cumberland via Normandy. Le Dakari, well, that sounds Norman to me. And LeBron, Sheriff of Cumberland. I mean, look at these guys. They're everywhere. Sheriff of Cumberland. If you trace him back, he'll be somebody. Robert LeBrown. So that's Drumborough, Cumberland. Anyway, that's a Scottish name. So yet again, no kings. We've managed to find the Bannisters and places like that, but no kings or anything like that. But they do go back to the lords, so they do go back to the big names. Hammerton in Yorkshire, we've seen Hammerton already. And what's this one? Tempest. Tempest, Tempest, Tempest. Bracewell, Tempest. They've got the crest, they've got the name. Tempest, Bracewell. They owned it all. It goes all the way back. And you might notice that one of the Tempests married the daughter of Walter de Waddington and Sarah Featherstone. So the Tempest married the Waddingtons, and so that's my family line. Goes all the way back. Waddingtons of Waddington, well, they go back to the Saxons. D-Tong, sounds Norman. Willington of Rystone, that sounds native. The Tempests, do we know where they came from? Le Tempest, that's Norman, isn't it? Roger Le Tempest. So, well, that's 1060, but we don't know where he came from. Waddington, Sir Featherstone. Her mother was Lady Alice Lascelles. If you can find Lascelles, obviously, that goes back to Pico de Lascelles. And Pico de Lascelles, High Sheriff of Cambridgeshire, and that goes back to Normandy. Let's say de Lascelles. So, they were hanging around, these big people, but yet again, they're not really going anywhere. If you follow these back, they will link to a king eventually, and they do. But I'm not going to show you that on this particular one. And Joan de Hertford. Well, it's a big name. So you can see as soon as you hit the big names, that family crest, it spawns all the rest. Alicia de Blackburn, we've seen them already. The Talbots of famous Talbot of Clitheroe, Talbot of Barshall Leaves. They go back to the Tallybois, which is obviously Norman. Let's have a look. William Lesire Talbot, according to this. Let's have a look. They're linking to the third king of Normandy. So that's a king. That's our first king that we found today. Richard the Fearless, third king of Normandy. So, and then the second king of Normandy, and that goes back to the Sea Kings and Finland and all that kind of thing. And de Lacy owned most of Lancashire. De Lacy from Calvados, Normandy. So de Ferrier, that's another Norman name. The Hollands again, and the Radcliffes. So the Radcliffes and the Hollands all linked up. Thurston de Holland, Elizabeth Holland of Samlesbury, Walter de Samlesbury. So they go back to the Samlesburys, the Kelletts again. Thurston de Holland. So if you follow these Hollands, you'll find the Holland line, which is, as far as I know, a bit nearer. This is the 1200s, so it's a bit nearer to us than this line, so you won't see it, but it is there. So that's that one then. So all we've literally done is go back a few generations, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 generations, and we've managed to find a king. And just the one family crest has unlocked the rest. So let's go back all the way through it. And the Jacksons come from, well, Bury, it says Radcliffe, but they actually come from Westmoreland. Oldham, they come from Westmoreland somewhere. And we're up to Betty Monk, or Betty Monk and Richard Monk. They link into the Townleys. The Nuttalls go back to obviously the Nuttalls of Pendle. Rochdale Nuttalls, Nuttalls Pendle. The Howarths of Haworth. And then here we go, some more Townleys. So we've got Martha Townley, and that's where you get Richard Nuttall from. So you got Lawrence Nuttall of Clayton Wers, John Nuttall. These may or may not have had their own manors. We definitely know Townleys had their own manors because they were based in Townley Hall. This was a separate branch of the Townleys. And so, if you remember again from the big map, Townley's is written in big, just as big as the Tempests, and they had another branch which was in Barnfield, and so Burnley, Hapton, Stony Edge. I think that's that branch. I'm not quite sure. Barnshire, Barnside, Townley's, Barnside, Lineage, and then finally we get to this guy, Lawrence Townley of Barnside, and he links up to George Washington, Queen Elizabeth II, General Lee, Winston Churchill, the Pendle Witches, and King Arthur. So from him, it links back to the main Townley branch again, John Townley of Townley Hall. And the Townley Hall branch are, all connected to everybody else, as you can see. As soon as you hit the Townleys, you're back to the Stanleys, the Sherbans of Stonyhurst College, what it is now, and the Blackburns of Blackburn. They owned Wisewell as well, and so you get into everybody from them. So the Townleys, we've looked at them. The Saunitors, Harrington, English. So we've looked at all them. Joan de Neville, of course, that goes back to the Nevilles. And I haven't filled in all of these because it would take a lifetime. But as soon as you hit one name, you'll find it. Hacking is a smaller name that comes from Claytonley Moors. So even though it's a native, it ends Church, which is just outside of Accrington, John de Hacking, and then that goes back to the Hackings. And you might notice that family trees, as soon as you hit a big name, it'll widen out again. So none of these are very big names, so it's not going anywhere. Look at that. Hugh de Pilling. We don't know where he came from, but he's got a family crest, so that has to go somewhere. Anyway, so that all leads to them. And we still haven't found any kings yet. We still haven't found any kingly lines, but they are out there. If you find them, if you're looking for them, they are definitely out there. So let's see if we can find anything else. And this one, Jackson. They married into, this is the Westmoreland Jacksons, is it? Well, Radcliffe Bury, so that means they must link into the Radcliffes and the Ainsworths, which they do. That was a complete guess. Ambrose Jackson, Cheetham from Cheetham Hill, Sir Molyneux, Southwark again, Sir Thomas Molyneux of Molyneux, the Duttons of Dutton, which come from Cheshire, Ainsworth from Ainsworth, of course, and so Boltons from Bolton, de Boulton could be French, I don't know, but Boltons of Bolton, they didn't really do much. It's not a big name, they don't have a big crest, but you might find something. But look at this, they go into Moses Partington, of Middleton in Lancashire. Now, we know for a fact, or I do know for a fact, that the Partingtons, eventually, we can track them down. They have faces. And if they have faces, then they're big people, and they owned loads of land around Radcliffe. So that must mean that the link to the Ashtons, which they are, the Radcliffes of Radcliffe, and also Venables. If you remember Terry Venables, I think it was a soccer manager, Terry Venables. Let's see if we can find Venables on here. Have I even put Venables on here? I don't think I have actually, but they came from Warrington area. Warrington, it's not looking like I've bothered to put them on, but if you look for Warrington and Venables on this kind of area, then you'll find they go back to Cheshire. No, it's not, I can't see anything, but that's Venables anyway. Venables, let's see if I filled those in. Oh, well, according to that, it's Northumberland. Let's have a look. Kidderton in Cheshire, that's where they came from. Sir Thomas Venables, MP. So they're in Cheshire, and then from there we don't know. And I think they link into the Northumberlands. which after that disappears with Free Wilmslow. You see, Wilmslow's in Cheshire, and Venables of Cheshire, and they link back to Theobald the Trickster, the Count of Blois. So William de Venable must have settled down in Bolin, which is Wilmslow in Cheshire. So that's them. The Breton, William Breton, Knight of Breton. So they must have links with the Ashtons and that kind of thing. And so, well, the Venables, the Needhams, and you can see Richard Ashton, whatever. He links back to the Ashetons, Middleton, Ashtons of Middleton, big names, Sir, and obviously if it's a Sir, it's a big name, that goes without saying, so we'll just say that. Ashton Hall, Ashton under Line, Ashton, the Triple Crown is known as a Sir, is Ashton, and he comes from Ashton. So where did they come from then? Ashton under Line, Ashtons of Ashton, and it runs out John de Acheton, Knight. So we don't know if that's French, whether it isn't, but they link obviously to the Bannisters. The Bannisters! You can't step one pace in Lancashire without falling over the Bannisters. Mollington Bannister Manor in Cheshire. So the Bannisters, if you follow them back, Makerfield, England. So we've moved from Cheshire now back into Normandy. Robert de Bannister of Rouen again. And that's a dead end. So de Crepon, that's another big name. Not too worried about that. So the Bannisters always pop up and they're married into everybody who was everybody. So you'll find Bannisters everywhere. Linda Bellingham, I'm not quite sure that's a big name, but they've got a crest. And so they might be somebody. Davenport, well, here we go. Byron. We've seen the Byrons already. Lord Byron, John Byron, originally came from there. Clayton in Lancashire, Middleton in Lancashire, that's where Byrons are. And Strelly, it's not Shelley, it's Strelly, so they came from Nottingham way. So, well, what can we see? If we find one line like this on its own, it can only mean one thing. Margaret de Acheton, Ashton on the Line, and they linking to the Greystokes. If you remember Tarzan, Lord Greystoke, 5th Lord Greystoke, Tarzan of the Jungle. And where'd they come from? Well, of course, they come from John of Gaunt, who was the son of Henry III. So, from the Ashtons, we've gone straight to the king. And let's have a look. From the Byrons, Ashtons again, Ashetons again. So the Ashtons have got a royal line. So that's interesting, isn't it? Our first royal line that we've managed to find on our chart. So what else can we find? The Strelly. And obviously, if you get back to the 1400s, then there's a likely chance that you connect with somebody. If you can't get it all the way back there, they go back through barons and barons and barons. So if you can't get it back there by now, then you're going to be struggling. Strelly, if we go the north way, it links into John de Loire, John Eleanor de Loire, it links in with King Henry III, Winchester. If we take the bottom one, it links into the Hungerfords, who links into the Peverils, Sir Peveril, who links into the Cornwalls, who link into King Henry II. So once you get back to this far, the House of Lancaster usually leads back to the king. And from there you go through the Plantagenets and the French monarchy, which some of them I've listed down. So that's yet another king. So if you can get back through those big names, it is possible to find someone connected. And Crompton, that's a name, I think that goes back somewhere. The K's, I think you noticed the K's on the other tree, that goes back somewhere. And the De Hortons eventually go back to the Hortons and Wilkinsons. So there are other connections on my tree. This is the final one on the other side. So let's just whiz through this. Harrison obviously goes through the Harrisons. The DeKendals of Kendal. Swinyards of Leeds. Bracewells of Bracewell and Boyne-Oldswick. So you know straight away, Harrison, George Harrison of the Beatles, goes all the way back. They've got a crest, they've got everybody. Hoddesall, that sounds like the name of a place to me. Hoddesall of Barshall Eaves. Holt of the Holts. The Hartleys go back, but I haven't traced them. And the Taskers, they go back to Yorkshire. So, again, there is an outside chance that one of these, or some of these, or all of these, eventually link back to some kind of king. And we don't know, we haven't got a clue at the moment, but I definitely have traced kings on these lines. And obviously the Kenyans go way back, and the Hollands go back. Lady Anne de Holland, Sir John Kenyon. So anyway, and that sounds very French to me. So, and the Radcliffes. So you can't move the Hollands and Radcliffes and Holdens. Alistair Holden of Holden. Holdens of Lincoln. Okay. So you can't move from on that tree. Let's just check out my tree, because it really doesn't go very far. The Ayrtons don't go very far, but that links into the Tattersalls. And the Browns don't go very far, but that links to the Kerrs, which was an ancient clan of Scotland. And let's see, not much. Atkinson, that might be a big name. It doesn't go anywhere, it goes to Cumberland. John de Stirling, that might be a big name. Richardson de Roche, that comes from Ireland. And the Burneys come from the long line of O'Burneys, or however you pronounce that, in Ireland. They go all the way back. So, still no kings. And the Waddingtons, we finally get back to the Waddingtons. The Seeds of Ribchester. Willasey, that probably goes back somewhere. Let's see, the Eccles, the Woods, the Thompson, Thomas Hornby. The Atkinsons again. It's not looking good. The Marsdens of Marsden, the Thompsons, no, none of these are going back anywhere. Ingham's is a good line, but it's very hard to trace. Whitakers, according to this, used to own Symonston Hall. So if you go Whitaker, that's a big line. Again, as soon as we hit those 1500s, bang, straight in there. Crest, land, manor, hall. So, Hayton of Cronkshaw, Clough of the Cloughs, I think that's a Lancashire name. Fielding, that's, well, I'm not sure about that. The Bartons, that goes all the way back. The Deans, let's have a look. The Hortons, we know of the Hortons, Horton Hall. And let's have a look at that. Anne Stanworth, that sounds like a noble title, doesn't it? Stanworth. And so that links back to the Inghams again. Not to be confused by the Ingrams. So Stanworth, that links back, well, I've traced as far as Corn. So, bang, look at that. And now, by now, if you've seen my map, you've seen the Nowells, Pendlewick Trials. What does the Nowells link back? Well, if you hit the Nowells of Reed, then you've hit the Townleys, the Bannisters, the Sherbans, the Radcliffes, the Talbots, and the Nevilles. If you think that Neville is a royal line, it is, because they're linked to the Nevilles of Raby Castle, who link back to King Edward III of England. So it goes all the way back through there. And the Nevilles, the Neville, and French. So the Talbots we've seen, so that links back to the king. As soon as you hit those royal crests, bang, you're straight in there. So, and the Bannisters, we know at least that the Bannisters go all the way back. And the Nowells, we haven't followed the Nowells yet, that links to Adam Nowell. Greater Merely, not quite sure about that, but he married the heiress of Stephen de Merely, so he must have been somebody. And the Fittons of Cheshire, again, another line. Fittons, de Fitton. Then back to the Lacys, Lord of Pontefract. The Lacys, of course, owned tons of Lancashire, the Masseys there as well. The Lacy, in this case, doesn't link to the Lassale, it links back to the second King of Normandy, which links back to Rollo and all those kings. So that's de Lacy. De Fitton, again, another French name. And let's see now, Boleyn of Boleyn. That name sounds familiar, doesn't it? So you can see now, just by doing this, just by looking at all these names, there is a chance, an outside chance, that some of these will link all the way back, and I'm pretty sure the Radcliffes, I'm pretty sure that I'm missing somebody here. Let's look at the Talbots. Have we done that already? So I'm forgetting now. Talbots, Ralph Talbot, Ralph de Bottler, and the Talbots to do. Oh, look at that. The Talbots have married into, look at that, Elizabeth Dispenser. Elizabeth Dispenser, who links into Hugh Dispenser, who links into Hugh Dispenser, Ryle, Falmouth. So that's the Dispensers, which tried to marry into the royal line, but not quite sure that they made it. Let's see. Let's see if any of them actually made it. Rohis of Bruce, no, it doesn't look like they did. Not on this particular one. So we've got the Dispensers at least. And who's that? Second Baron of Leal. Warren of Leal. Fitzalan of Leal. And then you get into the Mortimers. Bob Mortimer. Who would have thought that Bob Mortimer would link back? Well, it doesn't look like it's on here, but it does. It is there. And they definitely link back, so that's a French name. And Fitzalan, the 7th Earl of Arundel, they link back to the kings of Scotland. And Robert the Bruce and all that kind of thing. So, Beauchamp. Let's have a look at Beauchamp. That sounds like the royal name, doesn't it? Beauchamp. And it looks like Matilda of Tallybois. Robert Beauchamp of Tallybois. Well, we don't know, but that Beauchamp, if you remember, if I can find it, was the other line. Oh, that's Beaufort. I see. That's why we couldn't find it. But you'll be glad to hear now that we're getting to Sir Hugh Bigod, 3rd Earl of Norfolk, surety of the Magna Carta. Oh, Bigod, that's obviously a name, isn't it? So if I bothered to trace all the way back, Mortimer, Countess Mortimer, Ralph de Mortimer, 1190. So does that mean that the natives, yeah, Wigmore, Herefordshire, Hugh de Mortimer, what's going on here? 1066. You see, Ralph de Mortimer, Wigmore in Normandy. Normandy. So who we're tracing now? Bob Mortimer. So my last link is Walter de Martin, Saint Marie, Normandy. So Mortimer's another Norman name. They came over with William the Conqueror. So I know for a fact, somewhere along this line, it does link back to the royals, but it's pretty difficult. Only about 5% of my lines go anywhere near royals, but about 50% of my lines go through the big names. The Nowells, the Sherbans, the Mortimers, the Barons, Ainsworth, Grimshaw, Townley, Sherburn, Southworth, Nutter, Tempest, Holden. All these names, Horton, all of them link back. And if we go back far enough, we'll find where they all came from. They must have all come from somewhere. And they did. And at one time, they did own chunks of land all throughout Lancashire. So I hope this has introduced you to the big names. The big names. Talbot, there he is. The big names of Lancashire. And hopefully, if you go back or if you're connected to somebody, if you're called Stanley or Stanley, somebody, then you think, oh, well, Stanley, where does that come from? You know, or Hesketh or Clifton or whatever. You might think, oh, that comes from nobody. No, on the contrary, Kenyon, Southworth, Butler, they go all the way back to big names. And if you research those, you'll find those names. So thank you for joining me on this quest, and I hope to see you again in another video sometime soon. Thank you.